Hi everyone, and welcome to day 2 of this year's Pentaward Spring Festival. I'm Jennifer Clements and I'm the Pentaward Marketing Manager. Our first session today is going to be hosted by Mike Webster, who you can also see on the screen, from 1HQ Global. His session is exploring how the search for sustainability has impacted our sensorial experiences in packaging. Before we start, I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. So UPM Raflatac, who will also be joining us later alongside Maison Lilith from Pernod Ricard, Tapi, De Prosa, Le Brenta, OI, and Reflex. There will be a short Q&A at the end of Mike's session, so feel free to leave any comments in the chat. Welcome, Mike, and over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name is Mike Webster. I head up the 3D Experience and Sustainability team at 1HQ. And yeah, I'm just here to talk a little bit about how we're seeing the sort of changing landscape of sustainable packaging really having an impact on the potential for much better sensorial experiences. So yeah, the talk is called Sensorial Sustainability. So I just want to really explore the emerging codes of sustainable packaging here, and then how these are impacting sensorial perceptions and experiences. So obviously, everybody will be familiar with this, but sensorial is very much relating to the stimulation of the senses. And sustainability is obviously the ability for us to be able to maintain things at a certain rate. So certainly from a packaging perspective, it's how do we maintain the way that we can live life today without affecting negatively future generations. So we all know the world is changing. I don't think I need to tell you that. But at a societal level, really, sustainability has moved from what was really a niche club of sort of campaigners and activists to a mainstream concern now, really, over the last sort of 3 to 5 years. And the mainstream recognition of that climate crisis is transforming our visual frame of reference, really, as we embark on this transition now to become, shall we say, more sustainable. Obviously, here architecture is a big thing. But when it comes to packaging, the landscape of packaging is also changing as well. There's been an explosion in material substrate innovation. So we've still got, shall we say, the traditional modes of, of aluminium, of glass, of plastic, but we're now starting to see new materials coming in, biomaterials coming in. We're also starting to see new ways of approaching packaging. So from single use, we're looking at reuse. We're looking at biodegradability. So there's an awful lot of things happening here. But this in itself poses many challenges because we don't really know which of these is actually really sustainable. And the reality is that a lot of the stuff out there isn't sustainable. There's so many driving factors that impact really whether packaging is sustainable. Of course, from a market perspective, the region that you live in is the infrastructure there, for example, to recycle or to biodegrade. So all of these things are impacting us, and consumers are increasingly getting lost and finding it difficult to navigate. And one of the key problems really is this perception versus reality dilemma. Quite often the perceptions don't match up to the reality. So it's really important that we try to look at that landscape and begin to decode it, begin to understand what are the new signals and codes that are going to help us do this. So at 1HQ, we use semiotics to help us define those codes that help us understand how consumers perceive visual designs and messages. And packaging is obviously one of those things. Codes are signifiers of meaning. Hello?
Hey, Mike, sorry to interrupt. I just want to check if you're meant to be sharing your screen at the moment or if you're just doing an intro.
I was supposed to be sharing my screen.
So. You just have another go at doing that, please.
Yes, of course. I thought it was already shared, so there we go. Sorry, everybody.
That's perfect. Yeah, and then just go full screen and reset. Yeah, looks great. Thank you, Mike.
Very good. So this is our packaging landscape, and obviously here we're just talking about perception versus reality. As I said, and quite a few of the things there that we perceive as sustainable aren't really sustainable, but likewise, some of those things on the left could be viewed as sustainable, in particular the Verve Clico paper foam. So I was talking about the importance of semiotics and codes really help us decode a category or a landscape. They really help us understand what's happening. And typically they can be broken into these three key areas. First of all, we have what we call the residual, which really talks about the past. And these are the codes that were relevant to the category historically, and which define a product's role and meaning in the past. The dominant is really what signifies the present, what's really happening here. And so these are typically a response or a rejection to what those residual codes would be. And then we have the emergent. And the emergent codes are really those ones that are developing now. And it isn't necessarily just in that category. So when we think about packaging, we can also think about the emergent codes happening in other areas within product design, within architecture, for example, and how all of these are going to impact on what these emergent codes are going to be for the future. So I'm not going to share a detailed semiotic analysis of packaging, but I have kind of come back with some thoughts really in terms of what this could be. And I have to give a bit of a shout out here to a colleague of mine, Amelia Beefman here, who's helped with putting some of these codes together. So when we think about the codes of sustainability within packaging, we can sort of create some sort of overarching codes. And these are what, these are what I think is actually happening here. When we think of the residue, the past, those overarching codes really related to the consolidation of the high-speed manufacturing line. For the last sort of, 80 years or so, it's all been about optimization of the supply chain, optimization of that factory line. How can we make things faster? How can we make things cheaper? And so therefore we have what we call manufactured perfection. And that's reflected in the products and packaging that we saw. What's been happening recently there's been a rejection against that. We've been rejecting plastic, for example, especially from all of the sort of plastic waste that's come about. And so there's been a tendency for us to look backwards, and we've been looking back to a simpler, purer world, really creating this construct of something that causes us not to worry so much about the impact of the packaging that we're seeing. So we call this do no harm. But really, the emergent codes of the future, while they're still nascent, we are very much optimistic at 1HQ. And we really believe that actually we need to look forward here. And in the future, we believe the codes are going to actually be what we call nature-tech symbiosis. So this is where actually nature and technology and science can combine and work together to create this perfect symbiosis, which is the way in which we can actually address the climate crisis. So I'm going to talk you through some of this in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the residual. I don't want to label on this too much, but as you can see here, I've just gathered a few sort of images here. And fundamentally, as I said, it was all about supply chain perfection. It was about honing that. But what you can see here is that there was, obviously it's a one size fits all approach. It's about making the same thing over and over again. So there's a consistency that comes through in this packaging. Everything is the same. It's about convenience. It's about disposability, of course. Lots of these things have been designed to just be got rid of, to be disposed. Maybe they are recycled, but we're not really thinking too much about the end state of them in terms of that. And typically, the attributes that you would assume here is we expect things to be pristine, we expect things to be hygienic, and also cost. We expect things to be cost efficient. So this is really what we're seeing on the residual. If we think about the dominant, well, then there's sort of three key codes here that we can think about here. The first is what we call unprocessed. And this is where we've started to see these packaging routes that are coming in, where, again, rejecting that core residual code of the plastic. And it's really about trying to work against industrialization. It's about something that feels much less processed. So, for example, we had the seed example here by Ecologic. This is a lovely cardboard sort of outer that actually has a plastic internal to actually sort of like retain and protect the product inside. But lots of innovations around the space. The green fiber bottle by Carlsberg, which has now become the paper bottle. That originally, when it was launched, was very much in this sort of beige space, all natural looking. So it's all about eliminating those sort of mechanical industrial processes. And actually, if you put a search in Google for sustainable packaging, which is what I did, this is what comes up. It's very much looking backwards into this old world, this beige brown world of cardboard. Now, another code that talks about the dominant is this sort of old world tradition. So this is where, you know, bottle designs are being crafted that take us back to those artisanal days, you know, where it's contrasting against the modern processes and materials, and this time coding the properness of craft and experience. And so the same thing happens with metal, with the tins, or even with the Dalesford milk bottle there, which is, you know, it's still a piece of plastic, but it's been made to look as if it feels like an old world glass bottle. And then finally, we have resourcefulness. And so this is where we're looking at a world where actually we've got a lot of waste around us. How can we start to utilize that waste? So we're talking about upcycling here, you know, finding ways to make something useful out of a material that would otherwise be waste. So obviously we've seen lots of things around, you know, regrinding of plastic. Nike did it, for example. They take old trainers and they turn them into baseball courts or basketball courts. But likewise, we have the ocean plastic and recovering all of that plastic from the oceans. And, you know, that dark grey colour for ocean plastic became a code in itself. But, you know, within that, there's also some lovely examples of creativity as well. This is Fitzroy Rum. This is a UK brand. And they've done this lovely cap on their bottle here, which, you know, if it was a typical presentation where I was in the room with you, I'd be asking you what that was. It looks like marble. It feels quite luxurious. But what it actually is sort of, you know, Coca-Cola labels that have been made into a resin to then cast those caps. But it's just a lovely example about upcycling. And here, currency really is creativity. Creativity is the currency for us to be able to do something clever with that upcycling. But I want to really talk about the immersion, because this is where, for me, the sensorial codes are really going to come in. On the past examples of the residual and the dominant, sensoriality really came from the tactility of the products, the finishes, etc. Of course, we got something from some of the looks, and there'd be things that were done with the printing techniques, etc. Also potentially with the ergonomics of opening and closing, but it was still very much quite limited. Now, I think with the emergent, we're going to start to see a whole new way of addressing consumers with much more sensorially engaging experiences. Now, the key driver really on the emergent, though, is that we've got this growing realization that we cannot keep doing what we've been doing. We can't keep making single-use experiences. We're just not doing enough. And there's definitely a gap between the promises and policies of governments in terms of building that infrastructure. But there's also a gap between the intention and actions of our consumers. And for this, brands must do much more to help people make those lifestyle changes required. And so, as part of that, we must put the brakes on resource consumption. This is really going to drive what we see as those codes that are going to come through here for the emergent. And it's the resource consumption that really lays at the heart of our sort of twin environmental crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And the problem here really is about single use, in particular single-use disposal. You know, we still all recycle. Certainly in the UK, we recycle a lot in the hope or the expectation that everything that we spend time sifting through and putting into the right crates is going to be recycled. But increasingly, we're learning that things aren't quite the case. A lot of the stuff that goes through recycling doesn't end up being recycled. It still ends up in landfill. So we're losing a little bit of trust really in those things here. And we know that we need to start to find new solutions. And so single-use packaging as it stands must be addressed. So there's three core drivers really that are going to help us address that. The first is biomaterial innovation. The second is reuse and circularity. And the third is the ICT revolution, the communications revolution. So if we start with the biomaterial innovation, what we can see here from a packaging perspective is we're getting some really exciting alternatives to plastic now. Some of them are really, really exciting. You know, one of the key things really is that some of these are being made from sources that are fast growing, you know, whether it be bamboo or algae, things that, you know, we're not going to run out of them. They're very replenishable. Some of them are truly biodegradable as well. I think one of the key tensions when we think about the PLA plant bottles that were originally pioneered by Coca-Cola and Heinz, they don't work because what they require is industrial facilities to actually biodegrade them. They won't biodegrade if you leave them in your garden. And the reality is that we don't have enough of those facilities. I think there's only 2 in the UK. So certainly they just end up in landfill because they actually contaminate the recycle stream. But a lot of these new materials that we're seeing are genuinely biodegradable. If you leave them out within 4 to 6 weeks, they will start to break down. And so what comes with this is a whole new set of sensorial codes that go beyond the visual. So if we take Haikals here, mycelium, this is a lovely material. We're seeing it more and more coming out now. And as you can see here, we're really seeing the shift from packaging that is made or produced to packaging that is grown. And the sensorial attributes really here are those lovely tactility that we're seeing, but there's a richness and depth of the color. It's not uniform. And even when you break into it, there's a lovely naturalness that really makes us believe that this is something that is truly going to be biodegradable. We've also gone from permanent to ephemeral. So again, this idea of packaging isn't no longer permanent, but actually it can break down. And this is a lovely example here of a pack that if you then leave it outside, you spray some water on it, you leave it outside and it will gradually degrade. And actually there's seeds within the substrate, so it will actually grow into a plant. But we're also looking at moving away from sort of this dense, solid packaging substrates to aeration. On the left-hand side, we've got aerogel. Now, aerogel itself is not necessarily a sustainable packaging solution, but it heralds a whole new way of looking at how we can create strong, robust materials without the cost of them being heavy and labour intensive or rather material intensive. So this Haikals pack again is made from seaweed, but it's a lovely foam that is super lightweight but doing the job. And we can think about, packaging as a substrate that really needs to be neutral. Typically, it would need to be agnostic. It's there to protect, and it can't really allow stuff out, but it also is protecting as a barrier to stop stuff getting into the packs. But we're beginning to see packs around, whether it's papers that are now being impregnated with either seeds or fibers, etc., which opens up the opportunity to introduce smell, aroma, fragrance into the packaging itself. But I love this example of the soap bottle here, where actually that outer substrate no longer is plastic, but it's made from soap. So we get the aroma, we get those sensorials coming through of the soap within the packaging itself. And then we can talk about from industrial to organic. I love this example. This is in Euro. It's a startup. These labels are they're OLEDs, but they're organic OLEDs. So these labels are fully recyclable, fully biodegradable. So again, it's just starting to show where science is going to enable us to, add light and play with light in a new way, which doesn't have to impact the world. And then we have from throwaway to edible. There's lots of talk around edibles. Obviously, there are certain limitations to edible packaging because, of course, if it still needs another piece of packaging, then it goes against it. But certainly when we think about, consuming your Burger King or KFC, in the retail environment, this is a great example of something where there doesn't need to be any waste. And the big question here is how far can we take this in terms of this edible packaging? Can this actually be something that enhances, the flavour and experience? Is it that actually you would choose the type of edible packaging because it's a little bit like choosing whether you want salt or pepper with your food? So there's loads of ways in which this could actually start to become a foundation for an incredible in-store experience. And we also go from function to celebration. So again, Uhu, this is made from seaweed extract. Originally, they were offering this as a way to sell water, but I think they've pivoted a little bit now, and it's all about food preparation. So they're doing lots of trials with Just Eat, for example. But I just love the way in which originally sachets would be such a functional thing, and now they've become this beautiful celebration of the ingredients inside, the flavors inside. So, that really does elevate the experience. And another example here from a few years back from Designs for the Future, It's Tomorrow Machine from Sweden, but this is a concept, but again, a lovely idea around the use of edible packaging. And what I really like about these examples, in particular, the one in the middle of the green thing, that if you look on the right, but actually when you break it, you can crack it open a little bit like an egg. So again, the opening and the serve, etc., suddenly is becoming much more elevated because it is a natural sensation, and there's lots of lovely explorations there. And then finally, I know this is not packaging, but I think there's something really interesting about the Impossible Burger, because the big unlock really with the Impossible Burger is that they stopped trying to replicate taste. And what they actually did was they began to deconstruct the mouthfeel experience. So they started with the mouthfeel experience and deconstructed that. And so they were able to create these plant-based burgers that in the mouth felt the same as a normal meat-based burger and therefore tasted the same as well. And it was all about, it was all about how do we kind of create that texture, that combination of flavors, even how do you recreate the blood in a way so that we get the overarching experience that we want. But it's all done through deconstruction. I think really science and technology is going to enable us to do that much more as we move forward. And it's not just within this, it will be within packaging as well, in terms of how we can get tactile experiences, for example. Now, the second driver is reuse. So, I mean, this is something I'm particularly passionate about. I really do believe that, we have to convert, where possible, all packaging away from single use into reuse systems. Now, if we can do that, that's great. Now, it comes with challenges, because here sustainability means more than impact reduction. It absolutely has to be. It has to be desirable and optimistic. It has to be better than the existing experiences for us to ask people to change their behaviors and for us to change their consumer intentions into action. But I look at it a little bit like the bio. This is a perfect opportunity to enhance experiences, to add new sensorial experiences with them. If we just take the pen as an example, think about the biro, single use, fairly minimal, doesn't offer much. But if you think about a fountain pen, now I appreciate there's a cost difference here, so I'm not getting into the detail, but bear with me on this one. But when you think about the fountain pen, the act of refilling, the fact that you keep it for longer, it becomes more personal to you, all of these things gives us an opportunity to enhance that experience. And so reuse for me is something we can work on. And there's lots of people doing lots of interesting things around it. For already the luxury brands like Louis Vuitton are looking at how they can introduce reuse within the perfume experience. And for them, a key thing is about stopping the packaging being disposable and treating it more as a service, as an experientiator. And of course, that opens up a whole new ecosystem of much more elevated experiences, because then we can talk about how you can refill. You go in store, for example. What's the experience there? How do we add new sensorials there to enhance that experience? But I think a couple of key things that come out of this really for me is around reuse. One of the key challenges is going to be changing these perceptions of people, where obviously they're expecting something new and pristine every time. I've heard sort of anecdotally that Loop, the reuse system, for Haagen-Dazs ice creams and Nestle as Unilever deodorants, for lots of brands. One of the challenges that they're facing is some feedback from consumers, where the consumers, if they receive a pack that's been washed and reused, but it's got a slight scratch in it, they see it as being not right and want to send it back. So we're going to have to address that. But this is a wonderful opportunity for designers to introduce, new ways of actually adding that patina to it. We all know that if we've got, a beautiful leather chair, a leather jacket, for example, a copper bar in a pub, for example, all of these things grow old gracefully. That's where the beauty comes. So there's an opportunity for us to actually elevate that and make that a core benefit, a core emotional benefit to reuse. And I've just included a couple of examples here of where that patina has been brought to effect. In fact, that Porsche has been restored, but they painstakingly tried to make sure those leather seats are actually brand new. But it just goes to show that the pattern is so important that they've tried to replicate that from new. Now, I'm not suggesting we're doing that, but I'm saying that we can create reusable packaging that we keep and that will grow with us. That will grow beautifully, and we would want to retain. And another thing really is, as we move into reuse, packaging itself can stop being something passive to something that can actually be much more active and dynamic and informative. And I love the idea here, for example, where OP is this Tupperware that when you put it in the fridge, it actually will tell you the state of your food. You know, the color of the disc there will tell you when it's, you know, good to go, or whether you're reaching the end point, or actually when it's gone. Why can't we start to introduce that into packaging, food packaging now, reusable packaging that, you know, when you fill it at home, you keep it, and it tells you all of these things. So packaging therefore becomes a value add. It actually does much more to enhance those experiences. And here, I think the final driver is this, what we call Industry 4.0, but it's that convergence of product and device and packaging. And how do we start to take the ICT revolution, and how do we work that into packaging? So again, when we think about reusable packaging, we have an opportunity to make that smart, for us to incorporate that into the thing. So I think there's a wonderful opportunity here. And, you know, at 1HQ, we call this packaging 4.0, and it's really where we can reimagine packaging in a new light that challenges the very semantics of the name. And so I'm just going to finish off with an example of something we did. It was a concept we did around lipstick. But I hope you will agree, it elevates the humble lipstick now into something that's a much more engaging experience. So lipstick hasn't changed for the last 100 years. It's been a very, you know, it's traditionally been a wax stick that gets elevated to apply to the lips. What we did is we looked at technology and we reinvented that. And for us, the future of lipstick is all about applying 3D printing, is about applying inkjet printing technology within the product itself. So rather than using the product itself, you would print from a formulation directly onto the lips itself. This is a technology that is being used in cosmetics and beauty already. It's being used, certain startups are using it for foundation, to apply foundation directly to the skin. And the wonderful thing here is it only applies the foundation where it's needed, so it doesn't just blanket apply it. So this is a technology that is going to grow within beauty, and we've applied it to lipstick. But the wonderful thing about doing this is that suddenly we're no longer stuck with the color of the lipstick wax that we have. Suddenly, if we're mixing and printing from those different formulations, then it enables us to have any infinite number of colors. We can even have expressions where you could actually have patterns that it would print directly onto the lips. So it suddenly opens up a whole new world of application of endless possibilities, really, in terms of what you can do with your lipstick. It also means that, of course, you only need to carry that one lipstick in your bag. It means you can have one lipstick that you can apply in the morning for work, but then when you go out in the evening, you can jazz yourself up and apply something different. So it offers a whole new wonderful way of doing things. But as you can see, it's a much more sincerely engaging experience as well, because suddenly that whole selection process has been brought to life through the product in the pack. And of course, because the pack is refillable, you're keeping it. The other way that we can really look at adding greater experiences is through mass customization. So, you know, as I said at the beginning, the current paradigm for manufacture, of course, is, you know, is making the same thing millions of times. That will change. You know, although we're not quite there yet, it's still very much in its infancy, its nascency. 3D additive manufacture, you know, 3D printing, for example, is making incredible inroads, and we will within the next 10 years start to see production lines that will enable you to customize on the line. And for that, that means that we can suddenly start to explore a multitude of different finishes and effects, etc., for the packaging itself. So you can select exactly what you want, and it can be customized to where you want to go. So I've given you a quick overview really of that. I mean, the final thing is obviously the systematic sustainability. And if we're thinking about reuse, it's all about being part of that system. So again, there's multiple touch points in which we can engage consumers with a much better experience. So just like to wrap up and summarize again. So in terms of the codes of sustainability, you know, what we've seen really, the residual codes, the manufactured perfection, although we're still seeing them out there, they are residual and they're going to start to disappear over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. The dominant ones do no harm. They will stick around for a little bit longer. But again, they are going to have to move on because they're not really addressing the climate crisis. They're not really giving us the solutions we want. And it's only really through this emergent technology of biomaterial innovation, of moving and shifting from single use to reuse, and as looking at incorporating ICD technology, are we going to achieve this symbiosis of nature and technology that will define the new era of packaging? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. What an incredibly interesting presentation from you there. Thank you for sharing all those examples as well. I think they really help to kind of illustrate the different codes that you were talking about. In terms of, from our point of view for the competition, I have also noticed that, particularly probably around the dominant codes, we've seen many more entries come in around that, including our platinum winner for the sustainable design last year, which was from Ocean IQ, and they use recycled fish nets. So we're seeing a lot of those kind of packaging designs come in where they're reusing materials, exactly as you mentioned. I do have a couple of questions for you. So first up, we have, how do you keep abreast of material developments, legislation, etc., in order to be able to advise your clients in terms of making the right sustainable choices and avoid greenwashing?
Well, we obviously have to monitor what's happening there. So we follow a lot of website trends, etc. We visit trade shows, so we're following that through the press. I think a key thing as well for us is we have a partnership with a sustainability activator called Anthesis. We call this Infinite, and we constantly talk with them as well about these material innovations, because there's so many things happening out there, and it is incredibly exciting what's going on. But you have to really understand and contextualize each of these innovations and really understand whether it's going to be relevant for a particular market. As I said during the talk, what could be relevant for the UK isn't necessarily going to be relevant for the Far East, for example. So, it is difficult to keep abreast, but, we just keep following all of these things. But we do a lot of work with clients, so we're constantly checking what's happening out there. And as I said, I'm also quite keen for there to be a lot more dialogue, between designers and within the design industry as well, to so that we can start to talk about these things and actually really highlight those material innovations that we genuinely believe are going to have the right impact. But impact measurement is incredibly important here. We need to assess all of these materials and make sure that they are actually going to give us the desired impact.
Great. And then we have another question around kind of brand identity. So obviously a lot of brands are kind of aiming to be more sustainable, got all these new materials coming out. So are there potentially any suggestions in terms of how they can retain their identity and that connection and experience with the customers when they actually attempt to become more sustainable?
Yeah, well, there's a number of ways. I mean, branding's going to have to evolve with sustainability. For example, when we move into reuse, there's, it's no longer going to be about just applying a big brand on that, because we then have to think much more about the context of where this piece of packaging is going to live.
Yeah.
So, if it's going to live in the kitchen and it's going to be visible, people aren't necessarily going to want to have a massive brand on it. So I think the big step really is branding has to become much more experiential. So the assets is really going to be, within the experience that you can offer, those interactions, for example, when we think about reuse. But of course, some of the big brands, for sure, Heikel's, I think, that, you recognize a Heikel's pack these days because of the materials that they're doing. They have a philosophy, which is about using materials that come from the sea, or they have some partnerships with developers here with the mycelium, for example, and in a way that is becoming a visual code for them. So I think there's also an opportunity for brands to build an identity and an experience around these new materials. Again, just the example of the rum that I gave you with the wonderful use of the cap. I think this is where, it's all about creativity. We just need to think differently about how we apply creativity to create these brandable, ownable experiences.
Yeah, that's exactly the example I was thinking of. It's about kind of the innovation, and that marble cap, which is made out of the Coca-Cola labels, is just incredible. So just think about like what you can do to kind of retain that. And then just another very quick question. Could you repeat the name of the packaging example where the containers showed how long the foods could be preserved for?
I think that was Mimic a Touch.
Mimic a Touch, all right.
So that is that yeah, they've got a website, and that is out there, so people can go to that website.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate your time. Our next session is at 1 p.m. GMT with Erica Barbieri and Henrik Olsen from Olsen Barbieri. They'll be looking at how food and drink brands can reconnect us to our senses. If you're looking to enter this year's competition, entries close next Friday. Thank you again, Mike, and we'll see everyone else later.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.